On the 3rd of January 1970, the landscape of Doctor Who changed forever. As a mysterious man fell out of the TARDIS, nobody could have predicted how much of an impact the following years would have on the iconic show. From the Autons and Sontarans to the Master and Omega, the Jon Pertwee era of Doctor Who introduced all kinds of new evil threats for the Doctor to face. However, as with every era of Doctor Who, the Third Doctor era was filled with stories that were never made for a variety of reasons. This is the comprehensive history of the Third Doctor's untold stories. One of the most fleshed out Unmade serials of Season 7 was The Circles of Power by Brian Hales, the creator of the Ice Warriors. This story would have featured the Third Doctor alongside Liz Shaw and UNIT as they work to stop a secret cabal led by Sir Walter Llewellyn, who launches a satellite designed to link computers across Europe and America. However, the satellite has been sabotaged by the radical scientist Tilverton, resulting in computer-related incidents breaking out across the globe, releasing robotic sensophiles, which induce amnesia in anyone not wearing a special pendant owned by members of the Circles of Powers, the secret cabal led by Sir Walter. Llewellyn plans to use the chaos to ignite a third world war, but the Doctor stops the plot by destroying the satellite and inverting the sensophile's programming to wipe the minds of the Circles of Powers. We don't know anything else about the story, not even if it was ever actually received by the production office. We only know about it due to Mark Hales discovering the story amongst his late father's files. Around the time he became Doctor Who's assistant story editor in late 1968, Trevor Ray spent 3 days with the Marines, carrying out research on a Season 7 story which would have been set underwater. He eventually decided his idea was too technical to be accomplished in Doctor Who, so the story was abandoned without even being given a name or any kind of development. One of the stories considered for the final serial of Season 7 was The Shadow People by Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer. This 7-part story would have starred the Doctor and Liz Shaw, but that's pretty much all we know about it. The story was submitted to the production office on the 10th of November 1969, but a pay dispute with the Plimmers saw the story dropped. Another story, The Mists of Madness, was also considered for the final serial. This story by Brian Wright would have seen the Doctor and Liz Shaw discover an artificially created human community. Script editor Terence Dix commissioned the storyline from Wright on February 17, 1969, and the storyline was then submitted on the 9th of May. However, when Wright took up an academic writing post in Bristol, he had no time to complete work on the story, meaning it was dropped from the schedule. Despite the earlier pay dispute, on the 24th of June 1970, Charlotte and Dennis Plimmer were commissioned to write the Cerebroids for Season 8. However, just a few days later, the story was abruptly dropped on the 29th of June without any further development. In the summer of 1970, the 7-part story The Spare Part People was submitted to the production team. This story was written by Reed Deron and Jon Pertwee himself. It also went by the names of The Brain Drain and The Labyrinth. This story would have seen the Doctor pose as Cambridge Don Dr. John Madden to investigate celebrity disappearances. He is eventually kidnapped by mummy-like beings who take him to Antarctica, where a hidden civilization exists. There, the Doctor participates in brutal games and combats a monster which dwells in a labyrinth. It does not seem like this storyline was seriously considered by the production team, as it was never commissioned or explored further. More than 5 years after completing The Web Planet, Bill Strutton approached the Doctor Who production office about writing for the series again. On the 25th of September 1970, he submitted a storyline for The Mega, which was commissioned as a 4-part story on October the 19th. Although Strutton worked on this project for a number of weeks, the idea was eventually discarded. However, in December 2013, Big Finish Productions released an audio adaptation of The Mega, written by Simon Guerriere and featuring Katie Manning and Richard Franklin reprising their roles as Joe Grant and Captain Mike Yates. As of 2020, this is the only unmade story of the Third Doctor era to be adapted for Big Finish's Lost Story range. On the 9th of November 1970, writer Ian Stewart Black was commissioned to write a storyline titled The Space War, although this title was later changed to The Furies. Black had previously written The Macra Terror 4 years earlier, but even though he delivered The Space War towards the end of November, it did not proceed to the scripting stages. Brian Hales also wrote an unmade story called The Hollow Men. This story would see the wealthy Sherman P. Rayburn determined to set up an institute to propel advances in medical science. However, this has taken up almost all of his financial resources, and the government refuses to assist him. Rayburn turns to a discovery made by one of his scientists, Professor Martin, who has found a way to turn a rabbit into a negative, which can pass through normal, positive materials. Rayburn forces Martin to use this to create a squad of commandos who raid government treasuries. The plan is only foiled when the Doctor convinces the commandos that Rayburn has concealed the truth from them. The procedure is irreversible. This results in the commandos turning on Rayburn and killing him. Much like the Circles of Power, we only know about this story because of Brian Hales' son coming across it. In April 1998, a 7th Doctor Past Doctor adventure novel was released with the title The Hollow Men, but this was an unrelated story. In late 1970, esteemed Doctor Who director Douglas Camfield submitted an untitled storyline involving a hidden Amazon city, but we don't know any further details about it. Similarly, Doctor Who newcomer Martin Worth also submitted an untitled story idea for Season 8. This story would involve plant life trying to take over the Earth, and it was apparently considered for the season, but never developed. However, the idea of plant life taking over Earth later appeared to some extent in the Season 13 story, The Seeds of Doom, along with the Series 8 story in the Forest of the Night. In spring 1971, Brian Hales submitted The Brain Dead, which would feature his iconic Ice Warriors, led by Commander Colvis, who plans to invade modern-day Earth using a weapon called the Z-Beam. The Z-Beam is able to freeze everything it touches to absolute zero, which the Ice Warriors use on human brains to create slaves known as Brain Deads. The Ice Warriors hijack a communications satellite, using it to take over the crew of its receiving station, who they force to begin constructing a giant Z-Beam transmitter, which will broadcast the Z-Beam around the world, enslaving mankind and adjusting the Earth's climate to something suitable for Martian habitation. The Doctor saves the day by overloading the transmitter just as it is about to broadcast, destroying the Ice Warriors and the Brain Dead. Script editor Terence Dix rejected this story, but the inclusion of the Ice Warriors inspired the development of The Curse of Peladon for Season 9, written by Hales. Around the same time he submitted The Brain Dead, Brian Hales also submitted a story called The Shape of Terror. This story would be about a rescue team being summoned to Research Station Pi Delta 6 on the planet Medusa Centaurus. They arrive to find the station deserted because it has fallen victim to the Energid, a space-shifting protoplasmic entity which can absorb people's brains. The Energid attempts to merge with the Doctor, but the Doctor manages to rally the minds of those the Energid has previously consumed, and the creature is destroyed. Much like The Brain Dead, this story was rejected by script editor Terence Dix, although he liked the idea of an Agatha Christie-style mystery, and it was eventually incorporated into The Curse of Peladon. For the final story of Season 9, producer Barry Letts decided to bring back the iconic Daleks, who had not featured in a Doctor Who story since Season 4's The Evil of the Daleks. The original story for their return would have been The Daleks in London, commissioned from Robert Sloman on May 25th, 1971. Almost nothing is known about the exact storyline of the serial, other than the fact it would have featured similarities to the Dalek invasion of Earth, except set in contemporary London. Due to this similarity, Letts decided that the Daleks would be more effectively used in a different story, Louis Marx's Years of Doom. Marx's story would be rewritten as Day of the Daleks and become the opening story for the season, while Sloman was asked to develop a new storyline under his original commission. This would become The Time Monster, which was the final episode of Season 9. The original idea for the opening story of Season 10 was Deathworld. Deathworld would establish that the Time Lords are locked in a conflict with a Federation of Evil led by the personification of Death. In order to prevent all-out war, the Time Lords managed to convince the Federation to allow them to send the 3 Doctors into the Federation's underworld domain. There, the Doctors would have done battle against various realizations of death, such as zombies, the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and the Hindu goddess Kali. The victor of the contest would determine whether the Time Lords or the Federation of Evil prevail. For obvious reasons, this was deemed too expensive and not exactly suitable for a family show. However, the story was later reworked into the 3 Doctors, which opened Season 10 by pitting the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Doctors against the exiled Time Lord Omega. On the 19th of July 1971, when script editor Terence Dix was on holiday, producer Barry Letts commissioned an experimental storyline called Multiface, written by Godfrey Harrison. Nothing is known about the plot of this story, although the story was apparently developed quite considerably. However, Barry Letts eventually decided that Multiface was turning out to be more fantastical than he felt appropriate for Doctor Who, resulting in it being abandoned on the 25th of February 1972. On the 16th of January 1973, experienced Doctor Who writer Robert Holmes was commissioned to write a story titled The Automata. Details of the story are unknown, but the story was rejected just 10 days later by Barry Letts and Terence Dix. However, Holmes was later commissioned to write the Season 11 opener The Time Warrior instead, which introduced the Doctor's new companion, the investigative journalist Sarah Jane Smith. The final Unmade story of the Jon Pertwee era is one of the most well-known of all Unmade stories. On February 15th, 1973, the 6-part story The Final Game was commissioned to be written by Robert Sloman. This was intended to close out Season 11. The Final Game would reveal that the Doctor and the Master are 2 aspects of the same person, with the Master representing the id, instinctual needs and desires, and the Doctor representing the ego, conscious perception of and adaptation to reality. The Master eventually dies in an explosion, saving the lives of the Doctor and others. It remains unclear if this was a final act of redemption on the Master's part. This storyline was created because Roger Delgado wanted the Master to be written out of Doctor Who, as his attachment to the sci-fi show made it difficult for him to find roles elsewhere. However, tragedy would strike on June 18th, 1973. Whilst shooting the Franco-German television miniseries La Cloche Tibetaine, which translates to Tibetan Bell, the car Delgado was travelling in went off the road into a ravine, resulting in the death of the actor and 2 Turkish film technicians. Delgado was just 55 years old. The Final Game was therefore abandoned, with Sloman developing Planet of the Spiders as the season finale instead. Jon Pertwee has often claimed that the death of his close friend Delgado was one of the reasons he decided to leave Doctor Who at the end of Season 11. The Jon Pertwee era was one of the biggest periods of change for the classic era of Doctor Who. It was the first season broadcast in colour, and it introduced a number of iconic villains and companions. The stories we ended up with were obviously a mixed bag, but some of these unmade stories could have changed the very course of Doctor Who history if they had been developed. However, with the arrival of Tom Baker's 4th Doctor in Season 12, the course of Doctor Who's history would still end up changing dramatically, along with producing an extreme number of untold stories.